Hi, thanks for joining me in the Listen Up Girl podcast. I'm Zach Randall-Friedman, the host of the show, and today is Tuesday, August the 4th. And this is Listen Up Girl, where I bring you daily LGBTQ plus news. And I've got a lot to talk about today. Today, we've got a Catholic Charities lawsuit that just gutted a state's conversion therapy ban, a senator who's finally saying sorry for something he said almost 2 years ago, a neo-Nazi hate group that has to pay up for menacing a drag story hour, a WNBA coach who wore her politics on her literal chest, a gay congressman gambling scandal bill coming due, and a love story from Stonewall. You have never heard it told like this. So 6 stories, let's get into it and start with a Catholic Charities lawsuit just gutted Michigan's conversion therapy ban. So we're starting with a real gut punch out of Michigan. A federal judge signed a permanent order this past weekend that blocks the state from enforcing its conversion therapy ban against counselors who say their treatment consists exclusively of talking. The order came out of a lawsuit filed by the Catholic Charities affiliates against Governor Gretchen Whitman, who signed the original ban back in law in 2023 and called conversion therapy, quote, a horrific practice. The domino here was the U.S. Supreme Court back in March. The justices ruled 8-1 in a case called Childs versus Salazar that Colorado couldn't stop therapists from trying to talk kids out of being gay or trans, framing it as free speech issue. Michigan's own federal appeals court had already ruled the same way last year, so instead of fighting it out further, the state agreed to a settlement. The attorney for the counselors called it a major victory for children, counselors, and common sense. Meanwhile, the state lawmakers who wrote the original ban says this doesn't change the medical organization in this country still classifies conversion therapy as malpractice, and the research is clear that it increases the risk of suicide and depression in the kids subjected to it. More than 20 states have currently similar bans on the books, and after the ruling, all of them are on notice. Our next story is a Senate candidate finally apologizes 2 years later. So our next story is about timing and about what it takes for a politician to actually say sorry. Congressman Seth Moulton is running for Senate in Massachusetts, and he just apologized, sort of, for comments he made almost 2 years ago, right after the 2024 election, where he told New York Times he didn't want his daughters, quote, getting run over playing on the field by a male or formerly male athlete. Those comments set off a firestorm inside his own party. LGBTQ plus advocates and the mother of a trans child in the district met with him afterwards, hoping for an apology. He didn't give one then, and he's not giving now. The Senate campaign underway. Moulton says he's spent the last 2 years talking to people in the trans community and that he understands why those words hurt people. He's taking responsibility. He says he hasn't used that language since. The reaction has been mixed, to put it gently. Some LGBTQ plus advocates say they'll take a real course correction over empty gestures. Others are saying the obvious question, does an apology mean much when it shows up when you need the votes? Either way, it's a reminder of how much ground has shifted in 2 years and how many Democrats are still figuring out where they stand. Our next story is the neo-Nazis who menaced a drag story hour are finally paying up. Now, for some real accountability out of New Hampshire, back in June of 2023, a neo-Nazi group called NSC 131 surrounded a cafe in Concord that was hosting a drag story hour. They banged on the windows, threw up Nazi salutes, and shouted homophobic slurs at families trying to walk inside. One of the drag performers there posted a video of the whole thing. It's taken 3 years of litigation, but the group's leader, Christopher Hood, and 19 of his co-defendants have now formally admitted in court what they did violated New Hampshire's civil rights law by trying to coerce a business into discriminating based on sexual orientation and gender identity. As part of the settlement, Hood has to pay $10,000 penalty, the maximum law allows, and complete 250 hours of community service. He and every other defendant are permanently barred from coming within 200 feet of the cafe, and the group has officially ceased operating in the group entirely. New Hampshire's Attorney General put it simply, no group gets to threaten or intimidate a business into breaking the law, and this sends a message that organized hate activity will not be tolerated. A separate case against the same group, this one out of Massachusetts, is still pending, But for now, one hate group is done in New Hampshire for good. Why can't they just go to a remote island and just fuck each other? That way, because that's probably what they're all into. They're sick fucks. Anyway, next, a WNBA coach wore her politics right on her chest. Time for some sports and for some coach who said everything she needed to say without a single word. Minnesota Lynx head coach Cheryl Reeve showed up in Sunday's game against the Indiana Fever wearing a t-shirt that read, "Trans kids belong." Right underneath her sports coat and view of the ESPN cameras. It was not subtle. It was not an accident. The Fever's Sophie Cunningham has spent the past few months telling anyone who listens that trans athletes shouldn't be allowed in the girls' and women's sports, and Reeve wasn't about to let that go unanswered on her court. Before the game, the two of them were caught on camera and looked like a pretty intense conversation. Afterwards, reporters asked Reeve what she said, and she wouldn't share the details. But she did say both of them understood that they have platforms and they talked about wanting to educate people even where they disagree. Reeve didn't stop at the shirt and the comments that ESPN's Rebecca Lobo called incredibly thoughtful. Reeve said the idea that trans athletes are the biggest problem in the world sports is, in her words, problematic, and that every kid, gender diverse or not, has a human right to play. For what it's worth, her team also won the game 108-100. Cunningham finished with 3 points. As one fan put it online, it in a world full of Sophia Cunninghams, be a Cheryl Reeve. Congratulations, Cheryl Reeve. We all support you and stand behind you. Good for you. Love that. Next, George Santos owes $35,000, and his lawyer wants you to know it's not an admission of guilt. A quick one, because honestly, the story deserves nothing more than a quick one. Disgraced former Congressman George Santos, the gay Republican who was expelled from the House and later pleaded guilty to federal fraud charges, is now on the hook for $35,000 over an unrelated online gambling scandal. His lawyer wants to be very clear that paying up is not, in fact, an admission that he did anything wrong. Look, we don't need to spend much time here. George Santos has made an entire post-Congress career out of finding new and incredibly bizarre ways to owe people money. This is just the last chapter. Moving on. And our next and last story is the Stonewall love story you haven't heard. And now to close us out, a piece of history that deserves way more attention than it's gotten. You'll probably have heard the name Stormy DeLavery. She's also credited as the Stone Butch lesbian who threw a punch that helped ignite Stonewall uprising in 1969. And she spent decades after that as a self-appointed protector of queer bars in Greenwich Village. What most people don't know is the rest of her story. Her 40-year relationship with her showgirl, Diane, who she met at a Harlem nightclub back in 1943. The story is finally being told in full by a person who knew both of them best. Christy Henderson Jenkins, a Black trans singer, actress, and Stonewall veteran in her own right, has spoken publicly for years about growing up with Stormy and Diana as her chosen parents. She calls Stormy her gay father and Diana her gay mother. Diana says bought Stormy her very first suit and supported her fully in how she moved through the world. And when the two of them got to go out somewhere straight together, Stormy would dress as a woman using her name Vivia, her birth name, with Diana doing her hair and makeup so she could feel comfortable and safe. Jenkins survived her own cruel, brutal chapter of the queer history, arrest on her first night at Stonewall, months of forced psychiatric treatment, and electric shock therapy meant to cure her of being trans. Through it all, Stormy and Diana were there. It's a reminder that people we call our chosen family aren't a modern invention. Each of us together long before any of us had the words for what that meant. So that's the 6 stories for you today for Tuesday, August the 4th. A court ruling that's about to ripple through 20 other states, a politician learning that apologies have a shelf life, a hate group finally facing consequences, a coach said it best without saying anything at all, a punchline of a lawsuit, and a love story that's been quietly sitting in a queer history, waiting for someone to tell it right. If this episode gave you something today, information, a laugh, a reason to keep going, do me a favor, hit subscribe and don't miss it tomorrow. Drop a rating and review wherever you listen, and send this one to someone who needs to hear it. This is how the show grows, one listener at a time. I'll be back tomorrow with more LGBTQ plus news. I'm your host, Zach Randall Friedman, and thanks for listening.